Also, we saw something different for our environment, like educating visitors on how to respect and protect nature and marine life. They travel to the Philippines to see. No one is allowed to feed the fish. No one is allowed to touch the reef. Don't throw anything in the water, specifically plastics. We're trying to just create a small impact. Just going to give you this kind of energy. Balancing enjoyment with preservation in this tropical paradise. It's not just about protecting the ocean, but also your home. I'm very living in the world like this. To see it, man.
This is CNN Breaking News. And welcome back to our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is CNN's breaking news coverage of the U.S. and Israel launching a major attack on Iran. I'm Victor Blackwell in Atlanta.
I'm Becky Anderson in Abu Dhabi in the UAE. Thank you for joining us. Well, here's what we know right now. Smoke is rising over Iran after strikes across the country there, including its capital city of Tehran. We learned minutes ago Israeli strikes targeted Iran's Supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and the country's president, amongst others. But it is unclear if any of them were hit in the attack. U.S. embassies across the Middle East are calling for Americans to shelter in place. Strikes. Officials say a missile hit the service center of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet there, and you can see people running down the street. Explosions there. Explosions are being reported in other Gulf Arab countries hosting U.S. military bases. People in Abu Dhabi took these pictures after strikes. These happened barely a day after indirect nuclear talks between Iran and the U.S.
And President Donald Trump said in an early morning address that the U.S. tried several times to make a deal.
Iran is the world's number one state sponsor tens of thousands of
like gola subscribe gola ummata like subscribe argusti banata chu
United States in particular.
like subscribe argu inde nachu salam nachu like argu subscribe argu
I'll say it again.
like ita sara subscriber ita sara yo sawan ba yo jina saw dandenya
Operation Midnight Hammer last June, we obliterated the regime's nuclear program, Odaa, Natanz, and Isfahan. After that attack, we warned them never to resume their malicious pursuit of nuclear weapons, and we sought repeatedly to make a deal. We tried.
President Trump also added in that address that American lives may be lost in these strikes. U.S. and
Israel and the USA launch attack on Iran. No war for Iran. Like subscribe argu Israel warana mbia tabashirtu kuno kana
and Jordan and Qatar both confirmed they intercepted missiles. Around the world, Zach Cohen and Elaine Tree in just a moment. Up first, though, Jeremy Diamond in Tel Aviv. Jeremy, what's the view?
Well, the United States and Israel are now carrying out a major military campaign against the Iranian regime. We have been watching as there have been strikes in Iran carried out by both the U.S. and Israel's air forces, targeting everything from military targets, nuclear targets, as well as senior political figures in Iran. And it all began this morning at around 8:15 a.m. local time, when here in Israel we were woken by the sound of air raid sirens going off, not signaling incoming missiles, but rather alerting the country to a state of emergency as Israel announced that it was carrying out strikes against Iran. Within about 2 hours of that timeline, the first Iranian ballistic missiles were launched towards Israel, sending millions here rushing to bomb shelters. As of now, we don't have any confirmed hits in Israel, but there certainly were several missile intercepts, including in the last 20 minutes or so. There's been one boom go off following air raid sirens.
Hello, hello.
And in fact,
Bonto akkam nagaa fayyaa keetii jirta.
I'm speaking to you, saying that alerts are expected in the next few minutes. This is the early warning siren that exists now in Israel to give people usually somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes to be able to get close to a bomb shelter before that final air raid siren goes off, giving people about 90 seconds before expected impact of those ballistic missiles. And so this is probably going to continue on throughout the day. Separately, I'm also learning from
Charger da gote fayyadam firaun. Fayyadaman jirum laabii fayyadaman.
Israel has indeed carried out strikes targeting the Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, as well as several other Iranian senior political figures. And this again points to the fact that the United States and Israel very much seem to be trying to create the conditions for change in Iran. And we heard President Trump, of course, urging Iranians to rise up. This is their chance to take their country back from the Iranian regime.
Diamond, of course, there in Tel Aviv, and we're hearing from military officials in Iran that they plan to deliver, quote, a historic lesson to Israel and the United States after the strikes on Iranian soil. Let's bring in CNN's Elena Tree, who's reporting from West Palm Beach, Florida, near the president's resort there. The president, it's not really to overstate the gravity of the message that today, and we're continuing to hear from him about his goals for this strike.
Yeah, I think that is part of this. And the president did attend to lay out some of the United States objectives here. You heard him in the clip you played say that he believes that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. And he went a little bit further, trying to say what the goal is. And we're just going to listen what the president said.
Mali.
Is to end the
confrontation by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States and our allies throughout the world. For 47 years, the Iranian regime has chanted death to America and waged an unending campaign of bloodshed and mass murder, targeting the United States and troops to the.
So, Victor, what the president said there as far as objectives go, he's talking about how he wants the objectives to defend the American people by eliminating this threat. We didn't go further, and it is actually a huge criticism we have heard from many lawmakers on Capitol Hill, as well as some of even the president's own allies, which is it isn't very clear. The president hasn't articulated in a detailed way what the end goal is with this type of action. Even the lead up to this, before these strikes have happened, a lot of people were saying they needed more clarity on what potential military involvement in Iran would look like. And so that is still a question after that address that he gave, and really what he's looking for in order for this to potentially end. I know I'm getting ahead of ourselves here as these strikes are taking place this morning, but that is a key goal. And one of the main things that we also said is that this is going to be a massive and ongoing mission, Victor. And what we're hearing from my colleagues are telling us that the U.S. is planning for this, there to be several days of attacks. And so there's a lot of concern as well that this could be a protracted military involvement. We'll be keeping our eyes on all of that.
Elena Treen, thank you for that report. Becky, hearing from the Iranians in reply to what we're seeing from the U.S. and Israel, show no hesitation. Of course, we're discussing with our military analyst how much the relative strength of this force, their arsenal, matches the rhetoric of what they're promising in response. We're, of course, seeing these ballistic missiles at U.S. assets across the region, but how much can they match what they say they will do with what they have the capability?
The threat is there, and certainly the action investigation has been undertaken and just how much more
Yung sa amin, bro,
there
ano
is
dito, di ba?
as far as retaliation is concerned. Clearly, you know, that's not clear.
Bro, ano dito,
We
magalagap.
have seen interception of ballistic missiles over Abu Dhabi, over Bahrain,
Hindi na chumo.
in Qatar and Kuwait
Mikatay.
this morning. So the Iranians coming good on those
Waan benne
threats,
keessa galina.
clearly prepared for
Jibsamina gagalame sete bishaan illee deebisee nan qallifadha oo tasiin qallatu gusumsan nagaa taasa daqiiqadhaan.
Regime change in Iran, and it also appears as though from the regime change in Iran, and it also appears as though from the targets, if it was indeed the supreme leader as one of their targets, and the president Massoud Pezeshkian, that they're certainly trying to decapitate, if you will, the senior leadership of Iran. Of course, and the military structure, if that remains in place.
Manu magol itte mama
One of the things that we picked up on in one of the today is that Iran's military seems to be saying that its entire military leadership is indeed still intact and leading what it calls its response operations to those strikes that have come from the United States and Israel. And certainly, you just mentioned, it seems as though the Iranians this time a lot better prepared than last June when that last round of Israeli strikes, of course, in later the U.S. entering into that as well. When that took place, the Iranians already firing missiles near U.S. military installations in various countries of the Gulf, apparently also in Jordan, and of course at Israel as well. Also apparently running into the area in Iraq, where the United States also has a military presence. So certainly the Iranians are saying that their response is in full force. What they continue to say is that while they were going down that diplomatic track, of course, the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi speaking to Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, they also did say that they were preparing for war. It certainly seemed as though they definitely were. They seem to have much more of a playbook, seem to be much better prepared this time than last time, and also claim that they can continue these retaliatory strikes for quite an extended period of time. Of course, we're not sure how big their missile inventory actually still is. But one of the things that senior Iranian officials told me now is that they have replenished their missile inventory since that last confrontation with the Israelis and the U.S. in last June, and even expanded their missile inventory. The other thing that we're also picking up that we hear on the ground that is getting from Iranian authorities is they're trying to project that they are still very much in control on the ground. They say that government services are still available. They say that gasoline stations are open, even though they're highly frequented. They're urging people who can to leave the city to be out of the combat zone. But one thing they're also saying is that markets are going to be open and are going to be stocked. So essentially what they're saying is that everything is going to be available, transport is available, trying to project that the government is still in control, of course, in the face of those words from U.S. President Donald Trump and from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Just briefly, the Omani FM, who have been mediating in Washington,
America turkutamo.
Israel wajjin.
US network, that peace was in
Kale galgala nanti lokkas.
they just needed some time. Well, clearly, that was a message to the American public and the US president. That interview only going in for the past 24 hours. Decisions would have been being taken at that point by the Trump administration. Clearly, the clock had just ticked down to the point at which Donald Trump made his decision, despite what he hears from the Omani foreign minister.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. That interview went out like last night. So just,
Gubi bala rabus. Dura bala kas.
President Trump's
Bala rabidi nunda bas. Biya kenya naga go.
from both sides.
Bala go. Ora nunda te go bichi. Israel tu roba David nagarga. Israel tu roba David nagarga.
Mahal sago.
Oromo randa bartu Israel bade.
Mera bedi.
Baba.
Ajo balas pana kana muzar.
Merkane dere re bunja kame.
maybe in Geneva or somewhere else in Europe.
Kaya bigyan ng buki ka na magkato ko bawal.
Was never really canceled by the United States, but certainly it seems as though at some point President Trump lost his patience with that process and then decided to take this military action.
For plugging with us this morning, thank you, Fred, and we will have more breaking news coverage after this short break here on CNN and talk to our analysts and reporters about how these strikes on Iran could impact stability in the Middle East. And stay with us.
Hi, baby girl.
Why text when you can talk? With Glow Talk Master 606, you get all the time you need to catch up with friends and loved ones. Free with Glow Talk Master. Talk for 6 minutes and get 6 minutes free. Plus 50 MB data. Simply dial *606#. New Glow subscribers also enjoy an extra 2,000 naira data and airtime welcome bonus. That's right. Every time you make up to 6 minutes of calls in a day, you get 6 free minutes plus 50 MB data. Simply dial *606# now to enjoy Glow Talk Master. That's right. 50 MB free data. Connect and share as you please.
Kayaknya rati beno jatuh am hala kau dengan orang sigat ya kau ini. Ada. Kau itu nanti balik ini. Kau sana mami.
We examine big ideas and realities. Make the world with brilliance.
Weekdays on CNN.
The ocean shapes everything. Climate, weather, planetary temperature, planetary chemistry. It's most of life on Earth actually is. People don't know care as the care. That's what Ocean Blue is trying to do. Protect what you can, inspire people to embrace the wild, restore places that have degraded to get to a better place. This network of hope through the hope spots feeding the high seas, which is half the world, just the blue boat. So public mission, Lee's mission, is to inspire people to know, to care, and to take care of what keeps us alive. Spaces, caves, times, and oceans.
The evolution that goes on doing this film, and the big anchor was less about what's in the head, less about what theirs or my visions of what the characters are going to do scene by scene, but how much each of them can get into their bodies, so they could just be there and see what happens. And that sounds simple and it sounds like acting 101, but it's extremely hard. As hard as, if you could truly meditate without a thought for 8 hours a day.
This CNN. Did the re-election of Donald Trump play any role in your decision to resign? Why do you need to study it? It sounds like the facts are great.
There really is much more than the reasons than doctors provide to us.
Watch The League weeknights on CNN. The whole story with Anderson Cooper, Emmy winner for Outstanding Reported News Program 2 years in a row. CNN's best journalists share deeply reported stories. This week, Omar Jimenez is on the front lines of Trump's immigration prep.
How did it go from you sitting in your car to then being dragged away?
Could these tactics accomplish anything? The whole story with Anderson Cooper on CNN.
Becky Anderson in Abu Dhabi. We are following breaking news across the Middle East. Just a few hours ago, US and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes against Iran. President Trump is describing these strikes as quote, major combat operations, end quote. A US official confirms to CNN that the attacks are focused on Iran's military targets, and sources also say that Israeli strikes targeted Iran's supreme leader and its president, as well as others. Well, joining me now to discuss is CNN Chief International Security Correspondent Nick Payton-Walsh, and we also have CNN Global Affairs Analyst Kim Dozier. Good to have you both. Thank you for joining us. Nick, let's start with you. Any information at this point on targets and casualties inside Iran? For example, we've seen the aftermath of a strike on a square where Iran's former president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad reportedly lives. Any more information about what has been achieved on the ground?
If ultimately, Becky, no, and at this point we don't have clarity from Iranian side or the Israeli side of the likely death of any of their particular targets here, and that would take obviously hours for solid confirmation and verification to indeed emerge. And it is utterly startling to have this very admission that part of their onslaught here was essentially decapitation, the removal of Khamenei and senior figures. Those linked, it seems, to the missile program as well. That is, of course, compatible with what we've heard from the Israeli government of them seeking regime change here. It is an extraordinary, bold step, you might say, because it suggests that they think that whatever comes after this current authoritarian government is better than what they currently have. And now many analysts have said, well, you actually risk potentially having IRGC hardliners stepping in to the fold. So I think there may be an assessment here that we're beginning to see, owing to the scope of ambition here, that Israel and the United States have assessed Iran to be an exceptionally weak juncture. But that leaves what comes next as a huge open question, and one, frankly, that I think the region will be deeply concerned about, if indeed these strikes were in fact successful. There are many attempts by Iranian state media to suggest that some of the targets indeed are alive and well and just fine. To dwell too much on that until we have larger clarity. But what's startling too, Becky, and you've obviously felt that where you are quite vividly, is the breadth and the scale of the Iranian retaliation that we've seen. I don't recall anything like this in recent decades. The number of targets that have been aimed at, the potential for civilian casualties in nation states that, may not share Iran's ambitions or values, or even potentially consider them to be an issue, but certainly don't want to be dragged into some element of conflict here. And that scale of response suggests possibly two things. An Iranian military that want to get the missiles they have off the ground in the air, fired as quickly as possible, because they're perhaps worried that they may indeed get taken out by these airstrikes. And also, too, perhaps a regime that is reeling and wanting to strike back. And that might be a sort of indication of the huge downside of how telegraphed this strike has been. Is the preparation likely to see Kenyan leaders
Bontu fi ebbiseen tokko jechuudha.
of any of them being killed here? But it's so early to assess the velocity of
Boontuunis
these
kanuma
strikes.
keeti.
And remember, as we saw in the 12-day
Like, subscribe gochuun dagatinaa fi uummata jaalala. Bye. Echa deemuuf baay'eetta.
And Kim, you've been in this game a long time. You talk to counterterrorism officials all the time, and they will have warned.
Hojii yoo irra hin jiraanne biizii ta'a kanatti uummata kana like share godhaami.
If the threat of action by the US was actually carried out.
YouTube kana maal goone biyyana sa'aatiin achi deemuu dide.
To your mind, given what you know, what happens next?
Well, we're in the upside.
Come on, family, like, subscribe, godha. Gaba balusi. Like, subscribe, gochaatuma asumatti wajjin taphanna.
Take out missile sites, missile factories, and more of the nuclear facilities. But instead, he's gone for all-out regime change. In the past, U.S. intelligence officials have warned us that this could lead to Iran doing a few different things. Most directly in that region, closing the Strait of Hormuz to oil traffic by using naval ships and also mining the strait, making it unsafe for anyone trying to transit, including U.S.
እንዴት ናችሁ? ሰላም ናችሁ? ሰብስክራይብ አድርጉ፣ ሼር አድርጉ። ነጋ keessanii jirtu fayyaa keessanii ላይክ ሰብስክራይብ ጎራራ Sirati mul'achaa hin jiru nan bakka.
Also, as Nick was saying, they've had a long time to
Sirati mul'achaa hin jiru nan bakka. Boontuu jirtaayi?
underground to operate some sort of insurgency should there be
Saatii tu naa guutuu dideebannaati. Sabskiraayibarii naa guutee sa'aatiin naa deemuuti.
We've seen this playbook in the past. The Ukrainians, for instance, had a plan that was briefed to them by many different special forces branches, including the Americans, that when someone attacks you,
Kan guduree jamareetu kan ijibbaate. Ijoolleen dhumtee maal ijoolleen ani beeku dhumtee. Waan godhuun dhabe maali? Aramuun faana seerom. Isaan keessaa wantoota qabdeeti. Isa mana xiruu ni jira.
Without putting any boots on the ground, without having any sort of military partner on the ground to pick up the mantle where the U.S. is handing them with this
Jalduun biyya afuura kuttuu keessaa kuttee. Amma ginoo gurgudaa. Amma yeroon uummanni maal jedha amma kana.
The supposed crown
Ummata jaalala.
officials, he said in public remarks,
Ummata.
Iranian military leaders who are ready to revolt against the regime. Now we get to see if his plans actually come to fruition, or if this collapses with informants inside the regime who are really good at rooting out any attempts at a coup.
Leenjifachaaru.
It's good to have you both. Thank you very much indeed for your insight and your
Beeke maantu si qaree leenjisan.
today. We're going to take a very short break back with our breaking news. After this, some details.
Baasanis akkama dhuguma akkatti nagaa fiduuteeti. Bye bye eessa deemtaa?
Stay with us.
Maal firiwuun jaamame. Warra walmoo haa ta'u baruu warri kun rakkin guddaa. Kunis mo'achuu hin danda'anii sunis mo'achuu hin danda'amu.
Train journeys are beginning to look very different. Today's tour carriages look a bit more like this. Your names on the floor. This carriage, l'Observatoire, is the brainchild of the renowned French artist J.R.
All of this, of course, takes hundreds of photos to like walk, to imagine, and it's to me it's already moving to come back inside because I know it's traveling, I know it's going all around the world, and sometimes I can be on it, but sometimes I'm like everyone else, feeling about it.
I'm Ivan Watson in Hong Kong. This is CNN.
Savisabo is one of the most beautiful ports to sail into. We specifically stayed in Savisabo because of the great marine life, very good diving. It is a hidden paradise. It's easier to free dive with larger animals like whales or pilot whales and things like that. So that's how my tanks came off when I started free diving. Sometimes it's so quiet that you can almost hear your heartbeat.
I'm Valeria Leon in Mexico City, and this is CNN.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Well, it's coming up on hour. We're staying across our breaking news out of the Middle East. The US and Israel struck Iran early this morning.
And these strikes happened just hours after the US and Iran continued another day of talks to try to hammer out a deal over Iran's nuclear program. And just as the strikes began, President Trump posted this message on social media.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world. For 47 years, the Iranian regime has chanted death to America and waged an unending campaign of bloodshed and mass murder, targeting the United States, our troops, and the innocent people in many, many countries. Among the regime's very first acts was to back a violent takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, holding dozens of American hostages for 444 days. In 1983, Iran's proxies carried out the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut that killed 241 American military personnel. In 2000, they knew and were probably involved with the attack on the USS Cole. Many died. Iranian forces killed and maimed hundreds of American service members in Iraq. The regime's proxies have continued to launch countless attacks against American forces stationed in the Middle East in recent years, as well as U.S. naval and commercial vessels and international shipping lanes. It's been mass terror, and we're not going to put up with it any longer. From Lebanon to Yemen and Syria to Iraq, the regime is armed